Welcome to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking about how to complete your bar application so you can become a lawyer. Woohoo!
Woo!
Your Bar Exam Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the bar exam experience so you can study effectively, stay sane, and hopefully pass and move on with your life. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app and check out our sister podcast, the Law School Toolbox podcast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on barexamtoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about the ins and outs of the bar application. And most people don't necessarily think about the bar exam as just being one part of applying to become a lawyer.
Nope.
Unfortunately, there are actually a number of requirements you need to check off before you get that coveted bar number. It's kind of a long list.
It is kind of a long list, and each state is different.
Right.
Even these UBE states where they're trying to standardize things, each state is still different. I was doing a little research on this last night, and there's like New York has their own rules, and New Jersey has their own rules. And
I think the key takeaway message here is whatever state you think you're going to be applying in, make sure you know what those rules are and follow them.
Yeah, and maybe don't look it up like 2 weeks before the bar.
Yeah, I think, if you are still in law school, you probably want to know before, because it could be even that there are issues with certain states that you may not even be able to be admitted in for certain reasons.
Yeah.
I'm thinking particularly people who came out of felony convictions and things like that. Certain states are more lenient than others about
That's true.
Are they going to let you be admitted? It's probably not applicable to a ton of people who are listening to this, but some possibly.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you know what those rules are. Most people it's more just garden variety. But, you got to do some stuff.
Oh, I talked to a student or a potential student a while back who ended up taking the bar in a different jurisdiction because the jurisdiction he wanted to take the bar in needed some sort of crazy certified copy of some sort of record. I can't remember if it was a birth certificate or if it was a driver's license or something had to come from some other state, and it didn't come in time. So he wasn't going to be able to sit for that bar. So he filed in a different state that had a different requirement so he could take the UBE in a different state.
Right. Yeah, particularly with the UBE. Frankly, it doesn't really matter where you take it. So, your score is transferable whether you pass or don't pass in that first jurisdiction.
But then you still have to do all of the
but you basically
stuff.
It's worth if you're encountering problems in a UBE state, you might be worth looking elsewhere. But anyway, at a minimum, what are some things you probably need to do?
Some states want you to register as a 1L.
Oh, I remember massively panicking about that when I was a 3L, and because California is, as I recall, one of those states, and of course I had not. Nobody ever mentioned this to me when I was a 1L in New York. Why would they, nobody's going to tell me I need to possibly register for the California bar as a 1L. But I do remember having this moment of panic and thinking, oh my God, I didn't register as a 1L. Would I be able to even take the California bar? Because that was when I was deciding which state to take. And as it turned out, it wasn't a big deal. I think you just paid a little bit more money or something. But definitely, they wanted you to have done this.
Yeah, absolutely. Then there's that MPRE, which a lot of people forget about.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's just 1 day, 3 hours, multiple choice, but you still have to do it, and most people need to do it their 3L year.
Right, or even earlier. If you think there's a possibility you're going to fail, I think do it sooner, because, I certainly knew people, even at Columbia, who failed it the first time they took it.
Yeah, you got to study for it.
Yeah, it's not one of those tests you can just roll into without having studied. It's pretty specific.
Yep.
And I definitely, again, I just didn't really have it together and hadn't thought about all this stuff. And so I took it kind of the last possible time I could take it as a 3L. And then there's all this pressure of what if I don't pass?
Right, because your bar license can be delayed, so you can come back and study for it.
Yeah, you would have to do it after the bar exam, which sounded like a total nightmare.
Yeah.
So luckily I did pass and I did study for it. But if I hadn't, that was going to be a big problem that I just really didn't need to have set myself up for. I could have just done it earlier.
A lot of jurisdictions have some sort of background check, or they call it moral character, or some sort of bar application, which includes an abundance of personal information.
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of them are now fingerprinting, and it's I guess they were even doing that. I don't know. I just remember at one point I had to get fingerprinted. But
we have to, everybody in I know you're not active in California, but we just all had to re-fingerprint.
Right. It's like, it's a process. It's not just like, oh, you put your fingers down and that's it. It's like you have to go someplace, and it's like, I think there are appointments involved. Like, it was kind of a big deal.
Yeah. A couple other lawyer friends and I, like, we ended up getting somebody to come to our office.
Oh, wow.
To do us all at the same time because it was easier than trying to go get an appointment somewhere because they have to be the certain kind of live scan something. I mean, it's not easy.
Well, and particularly like if you're not in the state and they may have requirements, you do it in the state. Like, you know, again, like these are not things you can't do, but you also need to be aware of them so that you know, oh, you know, the next time I'm in California, if I have to do it in person, I need to go and do this, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think like I remember I applied in Massachusetts was where I was first admitted. And there you had to get, as I recall, a letter from a practicing attorney, like attesting to your good character from a lawyer who was barred in Massachusetts. And like, I had never lived in Massachusetts. I was just clerking for a judge, and he was like, oh, why don't you take Massachusetts? 90% pass rate. I'm like, great. Sounds good to me. Because I was like, can't decide between New York and California. Those bars are really hard. Maybe I'll take the easier one. You know, like literally that was the thought process. And I thought, oh, no big deal. And then you get this thing and you're like, wait, I have to get this letter. And I don't remember how I ended up getting it. Like, it was really a big deal. Like, it was a huge hassle.
Yeah.
I think I had to... My godfather is an attorney in Georgia, and like he knew somebody. And I mean, it's just one of those things where you're like, this is a crazy requirement, but it really can put like a roadblock in someone's way if they don't know they have to do it.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that some of these things are just surprising when they come up. You know, even I remember doing my moral character in California, which took me hours to fill out.
Forever.
And I'd already done security clearance because I had worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office. So I had done like a mini version, I think, of this for my security clearance. I didn't have very high security clearance. It was a short, you know, a short document. But I had done like a first pass kind of collecting all this information. And thankfully, my mom, who's kind of a copious record keeper, my father had always had security clearance because he worked for the feds for much of his career. So she started keeping records. Like when I left home, she had a file folder where every mailing address, like she would just write down a new mailing address for me.
That is so smart.
I know. And so I remember calling her and being like, oh, no, I have to do my moral character. And she was totally like, I got you.
That is one of the most amazing stories I've ever heard, because I definitely recall having a complete nightmare of a time. I mean, you reconstruct your entire living history starting, I think, from 18. So everywhere you lived in college, like grad school, working, you know, in law school. I mean, places you live for like a few weeks in the summertime.
Temp agencies you work for.
Exactly. Like every single job. I mean, this stuff is a nightmare to find.
And then you have references. I had to have personal references and professional references. So you're calling your friends and being
like, hey, can you be my reference?
And I think what people also forget as part of this is they do actually send out.
Oh, they check.
They check.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
And so
it needs to be accurate.
It needs to be accurate, but also you have to warn people because, for instance, I've filled out a ton of those forms for California lawyers. I know you have too.
Yeah.
And sometimes like people won't warn us. And so like,
well, or they don't double check dates. And so, you know, someone who worked for us for a while, like we think they worked from X to Y and they think they worked from Y to Z, and those dates now don't match. Right. And it's just like, okay, this doesn't need to happen. No. We can put whatever dates, you know, we can talk about this before you file it and be like, actually, I think you started in May, not in April.
Right.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, okay. May. Okay, yeah. But you want to clear that up.
Yeah. And you want to tell us that these forms are coming so we keep an eye out for them.
Right. We need to look for them. We don't just throw the envelope away.
Exactly. You know, we open it. And some in different jurisdictions have different forms. I mean, we're used to filling out the California forms, but we got some from like a back east. Remember, I screwed it up and then we had to like do another one because I signed it and you weren't supposed to sign on the one thing. I don't remember how I screwed it up.
Some of them, it's like you've got to like print them and it just goes on and on.
I know.
It's such an antiquated process, this whole thing. Really.
It really is. But the reality is that there are lots of steps. And so, and it can take a long time. So what I think is one of the things that happens is that folks don't take the moral character seriously, and then it's going to take a lot of time. So then they finally put it together. They file it kind of late in their 3L year, and then they are like twiddling their thumbs, trying to wait for their moral character determination. And then if something quirky happens to it,
then you got problems.
Then you have problems, and you are dealing with the bar during bar study. Not fun. Not fun, guys. So we're going to talk more about some of those quirky issues here in a bit that can come up, but that's why you don't want to delay, because the time you don't want to be talking to the bar is while you're studying for the bar exam.
Yeah, or don't be me who couldn't decide which bar to take and then didn't deal with my moral character until I think after I set for it. And then that's a nightmare because you're like, I just finished taking the bar and now I'm spending 3 days trying to recreate every single address I've ever had in my life from like old Amazon shipping, which wasn't even early enough for college. Credit reports, that's another good place to find your addresses. Yep. I definitely pulled a bunch of those because, again, like it needs to be right. And I'm like, I don't remember the address of my college dorm,
Yeah, exactly. So that is a big project that you need to set aside time and energy to do, because it's going to take talking to friends, talking to employers, record keeping, digging, and maybe your mom will also have a file folder that has your address. If you're super lucky
and Lee's, your mother is incredibly organized.
Yeah.
And I mean, some jurisdictions even have additional exam requirements, like super fun.
Yeah. I mean, they're not, I wouldn't say they're like gatekeepers, really.
No, but you have to do it.
But they're just like hills, they're just like hoops you have to jump through. So Washington has this, New York has this, New York also has this new, I guess it's not that new anymore, but the pro bono requirement. We already talked about fingerprinting. The reality is that states, there's like this movement to make licensure more standardized from the bar exam perspective, but each state still gets to like hold power over who they give a license to.
Yeah, so you got a couple of people who are like, no, we really need to test them on this certain thing, and that person has power, so now you have to do a separate online exam.
Exactly. So again, these aren't probably going to stop you from getting your license. They just need to be done, and you want to make sure that you're not depending on having a license or your job. Let's say you have a big firm job that thinks if you get your bar results in November that you will be sworn in December, but then you didn't do your moral character, and now you're going to not be able to be sworn in until April.
Right. And I don't know if this is still the case, but a number of years ago, New York was absolutely notorious for this, and that they, in most places, like when I was admitted in Massachusetts, the judge that I worked for swore me and my co-clerk in. It was a very nice little day, whatever. We went to lunch. No big deal. In New York, they were notorious for only doing this at like certain times, a certain ceremony, and you had to, and it was like a couple of times a year. Like it was just insane. So people would just end up waiting, and particularly firm lawyers who like didn't have time to like go to this thing. It was like multiple hours of like going, in theory, this nice ceremony, but basically you just want to be sworn in, and there was like no other way to get sworn in. So I knew so many people who particularly had taken New York as their second exam, who were like forever before they actually got sworn in because they just could not make it to one of these ceremonies.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is the stuff people don't think about. So you want to make sure that you understand exactly what you're signing up for, and also so you don't get in trouble with your job because you don't have a law license when you think you're supposed to.
I don't even remember how I got sworn in California.
Well, any clerk, or any notary, I think. A notary can do it. Yeah, I think a notary can do it in California. I did it. My school, because I went to law school in the Bay Area, they held a little like mass swearing in. Yeah. There was a nice little reception, and it was nice. We all I
have a vague recollection of my secretary swearing me in after we got my results.
Yeah, but I think it was like any notary.
So she was she was a notary, so she swore me in.
Right.
That was it. I think I bought her a cupcake or something.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing that for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So point being, very different for different states. California, it could be your secretary. New York, you had to show up in person. At a certain time. That didn't happen very often.
Yeah. All right. So one of the things that I've seen the longer we talk to people about getting admitted to the bar is this stuff that can come up with these background checks or moral character that can cause a little bit of trouble. So first, before we dive into that, I do want to make sure that people know that it costs money, not surprisingly enough, to file all this stuff with the bar. So when you're budgeting your student loan money, you need to make sure that you have enough money to file. And so make sure you understand what those requirements are. We already talked about how it can take some digging, like looking for old addresses, tax returns, Amazon, like all credit reports, like all of that kind of stuff. But for a lot of people, there can be some challenging things that you have to report, and you want to be thoughtful about that. So some of them that I have seen over the years are issues with credit. If you've had not even bankruptcy, but if you've just had issues with your credit. So you've gone to creditors, you have maybe collection agencies have been called in. a lot of times that stuff has to be reported. And if you don't report it and they find it, that's a problem.
Right. The takeaway here is anything that you should have reported and didn't is going to be a much, much, much larger problem than if you had just reported it to begin with.
Right.
So this is not a place to get cute. This is a place to very carefully read the instructions, really think about the question they're asking. If there's anything that is directly responsive to that, you have to report it, because if they find out later, it is going to be a much bigger problem.
Oh, yeah. Even stuff that's not your fault. Your
Right.
identity has been stolen. So let's say your identity was stolen and you've even fixed it, or you're in the process of fixing it. But if the bar starts running background checks, it's possible that they're going to find things that don't have anything to do with you. And so you need to know how you're going to report that to them. So when they get some weird stuff from your financial records, that they know why. And so again, like, it's all about disclosure and organization, but you want to disclose.
Right. And there are actually like lawyers who do this type of work, at least in California, full time.
Yeah.
So
And
if you have questions, talk to them.
And oftentimes even the bar has like an ethics hotline or somebody you can call to ask, like,
anonymously, probably.
Yeah, probably, hi, this is Sally and I have questions about my bar application.
Or my friend's bar application.
Right, exactly. But I think that you do want to call and get these questions answered. Other things that we've seen that sometimes people don't think about, maybe back in college, you did some stuff on campus that got you in trouble. One of the things that you have to report are things usually like any sort of arrest or run-in with the law, and there can be some squishy areas. What about if you got detained by campus security at your college for drinking? That's a pretty common thing, but like, is the bar going to find that on a transcript? Is that on your undergrad transcript? Is that something that you need to report? The other things that come up, if there were any allegations of cheating. I know somebody that had happened. It ended up that they didn't get, the finding was that they hadn't cheated, but it still somehow showed up on his record that he'd been accused of cheating. And so like, that was kind of a big deal.
Right.
Something else that is unfortunately common are DUIs. DUIs are very concerning for the bar, because drinking is and substance abuse is such a big problem with lawyers.
Yeah, I knew someone who had gotten a DUI as a minor. So like, she wasn't really actually drunk. It was more like I had one beer and drove, but I was 19 and I got pulled over. I believe she had to go through some like alcohol counseling before they would let her be admitted. Yes,
I know somebody else who had a DUI that had to go through alcohol counseling to be admitted. So that, again, it's not that will prohibit you from getting a license, but again, you want to document, and they're going to ask you very specific questions about that and the conditions for that, and whether they're going to be concerned about whether or not you have a substance abuse problem.
Right. And some of the states still have some, I think, fairly questionable questions on some of these about like mental health issues and have you ever gotten treatment for, these. Again, like, if you're listening to this in law school and you're thinking like, oh, I want to go talk to a therapist or something, like, maybe you don't want like a actual diagnosis, for example, because a lot of them ask like, have you ever been diagnosed? Like, you might want to actually look. I mean, I don't want to make people paranoid, but I don't think a lot of these are probably ADA compliant anyway. But, you do, if you're, you might want to look at, I mean, most states are not that bad. Some of them are really bad, in my opinion. And they ask like, have you ever gotten any sort of like mental health treatment? Which I think is very questionable, because we want people to do that.
Right.
But again, like, you just probably need to tell them, like, yes, I did, if that's the question. You can't lie about it, because they can find probably your medical records.
But the other thing, you'd have to consent to the medical
I think
records.
they probably make you consent.
Do they make you consent?
I don't know. I think this is a very like squishy gray area.
I know plenty of lawyers who've gone through quite a bit of mental health treatment.
No, it depends on
so it's not prohibitive.
No. And it depends on the state. I mean, most states realize that this is a really stupid question. And, they phrase it more like as, have you been like diagnosed with a mental health condition that negatively impacts your ability to practice or something like that? It's not like, did you go for counseling because you were depressed after a parent died?
Right.
But, you have to answer whatever the question is. And this, frankly, could, in some cases, cost people probably to go be admitted elsewhere. Most states, I think, have moved in a more like liberal direction on this, but some of them are still pretty bad.
So, the big things here, I think, to remember are that if the bar can find it, you better report it. because they're going to go look for everything. So,
well, and also assume that they're going to be able to find it, even if you think maybe they won't.
That's true.
If you're blatantly lying about something because you think they won't find it, I'd say that's probably questionable.
Non-disclosure is a huge problem, and that makes them very nervous. I think non-disclosure makes them nervous. Drugs and alcohol abuse make them really nervous. I mean, lying makes them really nervous. But I think that it's really, what you said earlier is really important to keep in mind, that you have to read these questions very carefully.
Yeah, and don't over-report.
No.
It's like, okay, I talked to a therapist in law school because law school made me crazy. No one asked me about that.
Right.
I'm not sharing that information.
But it's funny. I remember filling out my mine, and one of it was something about, like, I had to report if I'd ever been a party to a lawsuit. And my homeowners association once, my little apartment in my apartment building, we all went through arbitration with somebody who refused to pay, their parts of the fees or whatever, the assessments or whatever. And then I was like, is that a party? Because technically, like, my HOA was the party, but I think I ended up just disclosing
I'm a member of the HOA.
But I was like, am I listed on some court document somewhere? Like, I don't know, and I think that sometimes it can be hard. So I went ahead and disclosed that because I was like, what does it matter?
It's like, it doesn't reflect negatively on you.
Right, exactly. But I also could have, like, called the hotline and been like, do you have to report? And I think that oftentimes people need to, be willing to call, like, old school, like, pick up the phone and call the bar and anonymously ask questions. But also, if you really do have some sticky stuff in your past, I think it does make sense to invest in talking to an ethics lawyer that can help you navigate this, because you literally cannot practice law if you do not pass the background check.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what these people do.
Yeah.
All day long. I mean, mostly, if it's a straightforward answer, they're probably just going to be able to give you that answer of like, yes, you do or you don't need to disclose this.
Yeah.
But if it's more complicated, these are the people who are going to be able to help you get admitted. So you may as well rely on them.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, don't try to do it. If you think there's like a serious issue that could come up, do not try to do this on your own, because I think, too, we've seen, people who did have what would seem to be kind of a red flag issue, and then, like, got cute with it, and then got caught, and then suddenly you're in this, like, you're going to trial, basically, about whether you're going to be able to be a lawyer, and that scenario could have just been avoided.
Yeah. And some of that all happens around the time that you're sitting for the bar exam.
Yeah.
So that's why you want to file this paperwork early, get it in, pay your fees, cross your fingers, and you hopefully, like, early spring, get a nice little message from the bar.
Yay, you're qualified.
Yay, you're qualified. I think the summertime before you're a 3L is a great time to do this.
Yeah.
You're not in school, you've got some downtime, start, even if you don't, let's say, all these forms you should be able to get your hands on, but, get hands on an old form. Start digging for the information just so it becomes
it's probably
easier.
Going to be about the same.
Yep. So we mentioned this a little bit, earlier in the podcast, but what about if you don't know where you want to practice? You can wait to do this after the bar sometimes, although sometimes you might have to fill all these applications as part of being able to even sit, but you need to investigate what's necessary in each of these jurisdictions that you want to sit in and make sure that you have all the documentation necessary.
Right. It just depends on your own situation, too. For me, like, I knew I was going to be clerking because I'd gotten that job. Okay, well, I don't need a bar admission to be a law clerk, for a judge. Like, yeah, he wants me to take the bar and be admitted, but it's not like my job is on the line if I don't get admitted as soon as possible. But if you're working at a firm, particularly a smaller firm, like, they might need you to go to court and you need to be there as soon as possible. And if this drags out, that could be a serious problem.
Yeah, and they can't bill you like a lawyer until you have a law license.
No, I think it makes a big difference if you have, a clerkship or something versus like an actual legal job where you're like, yeah, exactly. You're going to be billed out, and until then you're not a lawyer.
Yeah, and that's a problem. Yeah, and I just think all of this stuff, it's so important to be very specific. Can we take a moment, speaking of documentation, to complain about the Real ID process?
Oh, God,
because this is what makes me think of all of this, is that the Real ID, if you have not done it yet, is a pain all over the country. California has turned it into this, like, totally
nightmare.
Insane nightmare. But what got me, it took me two tries to get my Real ID, because the first time I went, I brought... because we don't have W-2s because we own this business, I brought all of my tax documents that have my social security number on it, that were filed with the IRS, that say I own half of this business and say how much money I make. And they were like, that's not a W-2. And I was like, but I don't have a W-2.
Yeah, like it's a K-1. Like this
I don't
is
have
what
a
we file
W-2.
with the IRS.
I'm not an employee. I'm a business owner. You have to be here with your social security card. But I don't have my social security card because I have my social security number on this like tax document. That's not going to do it. And so like I was 9 months pregnant and I had done my makeup and my hair to go get my photograph taken, and they sent my pregnant person back out the door
with no ID.
Sent me home with no ID. And then I had to try again. And I did try again. And that time I had to like call the Social Security, or I had to file to get a new Social Security card. I know that you're on like round 27 of trying to get a Social Security card.
Yeah. So now I finally managed to create my online account after being on hold with like 3 different people. And then I finally get the online account and I log in and I click the button for get a copy of your Social Security card. And they say, oh, you know what? You're going to have to go in person to the office to get this. And so I asked my mother, who was going to be visiting, do you have a Social Security card for me? And she said, yes. So she brought me one, but it's literally from when I was born.
Like
and so, I mean, it looks like something that I printed on my laser printer. I mean, it has no like security features. It's literally like it's a piece of paper with a typed number on it.
But I think that's what they all look like.
Well, that was my question. Like, am I going to show up and like, is this sufficient?
Yes.
Like...
And the weird answer is yes.
So, I mean, I haven't been yet, but I'm like, I could make this on a laser printer. Like,
no, I know, because I just got my
like
new one.
An inkjet, actually. I could do this in an inkjet.
I got my new one. My kids, I've got new cards for my kids.
But are they paper?
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I've been putting off making the appointment just for this reason, that I want to find out if this is actually going to be sufficient before I go to the hassle.
I took my paper one, and I won't even tell you. So my kids, I had my kids as home births, so you like they don't. You have to go like to the Social Security office and like prove to them that you had an actual baby. And I won't even tell you the like hilarious documentation. How many people had to say like, yes, I've seen this baby, to get like this piece of paper to get. But I mean, I think so anyway, we could go on and on, because this Real ID process is like totally drives me crazy, and I know it's driven you crazy too, but it's a very good exercise in how ridiculous these bureaucratic application processes are.
Yeah, just stuff that doesn't make any sense. I'm like, I have a passport. Like I mean, for me, I'm like, I have global entry. Like, you know who I am. You let me in the country with like a scan of my fingerprints. Is that not enough to get me a driver's license?
No, not anymore. And so that is the reality, though, is that these hiccups about identity and things like that can really go down the vortex of a time. Like, how much time have you spent trying to get your Real ID?
I mean, at least hours, and I've like literally never even gotten to the point of making the appointment.
Yeah, and it took me 2 appointments and time to get my card fixed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at the point of just kind of being like, you know what, I think I'll just travel on my passport for now. I think I have a year to get the license still. I'm like, this is not something I can be bothered with. But yeah, so now I have this insane, literally like, you know, from the 70s, like ID card or whatever.
But I think what also is so funny is sometimes I'm like, well, but I worry about traveling with my passport because I don't want to lose it. But I think now it's easier to get a passport replaced than it is to get a Real ID.
Yeah, no, you can, I mean, yeah, I have a friend whose daughter apparently threw her passport away.
Oh my.
And they found this out the day before they were supposed to fly to Switzerland on a Friday, and they got her passport on Saturday morning.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, they could not have gotten her driver's license.
Yeah, but you know, even a passport, I just did this for my family recently, and so lots of boxes to check. You have to be very exact. So the reality is all of this stuff is a bureaucratic nightmare. Don't leave it to the last minute. And also, you never know what's going to happen.
Well, and just don't assume they're going to bend the rules, because they're not going to bend the rules.
No, my K1, pregnant lady, go home. Yeah, I thought if they were going to bend it for anyone, nice, super pregnant lady who'd done her makeup for my photo.
Yeah. No, I was trying to, I think they would also take a 1099. It's like a few years ago, I had a 1099. I was like, maybe I can dig up one of those in a box of paper that I never shredded. And then it says it has to be current. And I'm like, well, what does current mean in this context? Like, is 2 years ago like sufficient? Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot. Okay. Well, enough of our rant. That's my rant, my Real ID rant for the afternoon. Okay. Well, and that, I think we should let everybody go about their day. I think we're out of time.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I want to take a second to remind you to check out our blog at barexamtoolbox.com, which is full of helpful tips to help you prepare and stay sane as you study for the bar exam. You can also find information on your website about your courses, tools, and one-on-one tutoring programs to support you as you study for the UBE or California bar exam. If you enjoyed this episode of the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you are still in law school, you might also like to check out our popular Law School Toolbox podcast as well. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at Lee at barexamtoolbox.com or Alison at barexamtoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at barexamtoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.